How are you all doing?
Hi, Prof. How are you? We are fine.
Hi, how are
Everybody
you?
good? How is your holiday? I know you were recognizing uh how many of you are Islamic Muslim. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry, but I
Eid,
understand how
it's
important
pronounced Eid.
eating
Eid,
is.
it mean feast.
Yes,
It's
yes,
Muslims have two holy feasts.
yes,
One after Ramadan directly, and this one after Hajj, which
correct.
is
Yes,
the ceremony for pilgrims. This is
yes,
the Eid for Muslim. Thank you for congratulations,
yes,
Arthur.
yes. I know a lot of you travel to the holy place, right? To that's so yeah, that's I know about it a little bit, but obviously with
We
language
travel
differences.
to our homeland.
Yes, correct. Travel to your homeland. Yes. Well, it's nice that you're able to have a week off to concentrate on that and celebrate and recognize what's important to your religion, and I certainly value that and recognize that. So great. I'm I'm gonna have to create a quiz for you tomorrow. I'm just gonna put it out there and for the next week, and give you a week to do it. We have to have two short quizzes in this class. I'm not going to make it difficult. The only purpose of the quiz is to encourage you to read the text materials. That's really the only purpose. So it's gonna be you know open book, to allow you to kind of find the answers. But given that you have the opportunity to find the answers, I expect you to be not just telling me, what the text says, what the book says, but to put it in your own words and elaborate and kind of maybe express your opinion about it as well. So those of you who've taken a course with me before know the drill, because we did the same thing in there. So you know, um, I don't like exams, but that's the nature of education, that we gotta have them a little bit. So just wanted to kind of let you know. Um, Everything else, your assignments, are posted, in the course. I put some deadlines in there. I would kindly ask that you would try to follow those deadlines, just because it's just easier to keep up with them that way. But if you are late a little bit, then you have work circumstances that prevent you from being 100% on. I'm flexible. I'm not gonna penalize you. So Rafat, go ahead. You had a question.
Yes, Prof. I see the announcement. There is a case study. But when
Yes.
I open it, I don't find anything. So maybe I misunderstood. What is exactly needed from us? What case study needed from us?
Oh, it doesn't open in terms of the directions of it.
I opened the assignment, one case study. Then I found only a button, aid submission. There is nothing
Okay.
required.
Well, I'll fix that. I apologize. Maybe I didn't make it visible or something like that. But yeah, good question then. They are at the end of your text when you go to that macro hill, the link that you access the text. There are case studies at the end, like in an appendix of the book. There are 4 or 5 cases that are being listed, and all of those cases have a discussion questions, after that case. So I'm asking you to choose any one of those at the end of the text and read the case and answer the discussion questions. In some cases, the cases may be a little bit old, in that they, talk about, topics that may have gone about already. So maybe you can, update that a little bit. So when I look at the case study here,
This one started with Boeing, I think. The first case study
Yes,
is Boeing.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, you're right. I mean, I had the text there somewhere. Okay, I'll write it again. I'll put it up there again. I I don't use Moodle a lot. Lots of other universities that I teach, we use D2L, Blackboard, Canvas, and so Moodle is I am only familiar with it, with the Windsor courses. So maybe I just did not click the wrong thing there. So both the course paper and case study, I'm going to put the directions in there in more in detail, because it says this case study will help you to learn about practical applications of the course. So I know exactly, and I think that what happened is that the other part of it I did not make visible for you. So I will fix it. But the case study is, the case is at the end of the end of the end of the kick the book, and then the paper. I would like you to choose a topic, more of a theoretical topic. So exactly other direction than the case study. In that case study, you are talking about a specific company. In a paper, I would like you to talk about a specific issue. So, for example, you could write a paper about child labor and the legalities and ethics around child labor. You know, uh, you could, environmental pollution as part of the, business world, and how that could be regulated, by laws and, ethics and so forth and so on. So, I would like you to choose an issue, a problem, a topic, or a discussion of a particular law that like I don't know, you know maybe not law specifically to United States. Maybe doesn't many of you work in an environmental area, but you could look at some sort of a United Nations or some sort of World Bank program or regulation or something like that, and discuss about that kind of a topic. So anything but not specific companies. Does that make sense?
And I beg your pardon. Now I lost myself. I open now the case, and there is really a discussion question after the case. So we have to answer this, or we have to create our own any idea for, as you said, that shouting labors, environmental issue.
There should be discussion questions at the end of the case. Let me go and make sure that they are there. But I have to do that after they are, because I looked at it and there was discussion questions after every case.
Doctor,
But
if I understood correctly, you need us to select a case study
yes,
from the four case studies in the end of the book, then read it, understand it, and get the main idea and write a paper about it, right?
right. And they are discussion questions. So yeah, the main idea, what is the problem? How did they work through that problem? How would you have done differently? That type of a thing. Because each of case study is presenting a case, a dilemma, a problem of some kind. And so the idea is for you to recognize what the problem was, talk about how they address that issue, and what is your opinion about it? Do you think they did a good job? Do you think that they should have done something differently? That sort of a thing. And like I said, I have the activity instructions over here. I just they are not showing to you. So what I wrote over here is that at the end of the text for this course, you will find 9 cases. Please choose one of these cases and answer all the discussion questions in the end with detailed and thoughtful answers. You are encouraged to use outside references. Please format your submission according to APA formatting style. And I'm gonna copy and paste that into that top part where you can, see it, because for whatever reason, the activity instructions are not showing to you there. So anyway, that's just my technical thing. So if you look at it right now, now the case study, this direction should show. If anybody can take a look, if you can tell me if you can see
Yeah,
what I just wrote.
yes, it is there.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, it was there when I wrote it, but for one reason, and I have to to figure out if, what was the reason that, it's not showing to you. But anyway, I just copied and pasted there, and I'm gonna do same with the paper. So that should be pretty straightforward, right? And if there's not too many discussion questions, there, just discuss the case exactly like I told you, that identify the problem, describe the way they went about dealing with that problem or situation, and then critique whether or not you thought that they did well and how would they have done differently. Straightforward, right? Make sense?
Yes.
Yes, no, maybe so. And there are lots of, let me just, case study methodology is something that Harvard Business School, they they popularize case study methodology. It's based on the idea that field of management, field of business, very difficult to do what we call empirical studies, quantitative experimental studies where you would typically do things in a laboratory. And it's difficult to do that because you can't go to a real company and say, stop everything you are doing, we're going to study you. You can't control the variables in a real company. So obviously then, the best way to studying management and business would be, there are two ways that are good. One would be, observation, which really is case study. You are observing actually existing situation and analyzing, how the company dealt with it. And otherwise would be what we call phenomenological, which is, you select individuals from that company, you have detailed interviews, you interview them, about that phenomena. You could do surveys, but surveys are often not very reliable for a lot of reasons, in real life companies. So case study methodology is the best way of learning about management, and especially law and ethics. It's really the best way of learning. That's how lawyers learn about cases. They read, legal cases, and they learn about cases. So this is how we learn about, ethics and law. We learn about dilemmas and ethical dilemmas that companies have seen themselves faced and had in their past, and we analyze how they dealt with those situations, and then we come up with recommendations and learn from those benchmarks. So that's case study methodology is a very, very widely known and an accepted way of studying business. That's why all of the books that we are using, virtually all of them, have number of cases, at the end. And every course that I teach, I ask people to do at least one case study, because I think that is absolutely necessary. One thing that I do not do in the courses here at Windsor is ask you to do group projects. Normally, I believe that it's also important for students to work on a project, case study, or some of that kind together as a group, and then in a class do presentation of that. And the reason I'm not doing that with you is that you're all in different time zones and, different parts of the world. And I recognize that would make it very difficult, for you, with your busy lifestyles. On the other hand, you seem like you're really, group that you are all professionals and you would probably work really well together. So it would be nice to see. But I'm just kind of explaining my reasoning why I think that there is important to have a case study. And in a topic like law and ethics, there are so many of these theoretical issues also that controversial issues and topics that is also important to kind of have a paper, where you can, and I, rather than giving you the exact topic, I want you to be able to kind of write about something that you are a little bit interested in, because that way you can explore what is valuable to you, and so it customizes the learning a little bit. So that's the reason and purpose behind those kind of assignments. So so thank you again for pointing out that something was invisible in Moodle. I will get better at this Moodle stuff eventually. So nobody's perfect, right? So are you ready to talk about globalization or business in a global world? Because that's what you guys really are all about. So I wanted to talk about, what's globalization? How do we enter to a global marketplace? How does the international financial trade institutions, how do they kind of work and shape that globalization process? What are the strengths and benefits? Costs and benefits. What are the major types of political economic systems? So there's a lots of content in this chapter, and I think we are not going to be able to go to super deep in some of these, but they do generate sometimes interesting discussion. And I'm not trying to make any kind of political statements over here when we talk about political and economic systems. So it's not a matter of which one is better or worse. It's just capitalism versus communism versus whatever. Going to have to talk about those because they are important considerations in terms of how do we operate in certain countries, what kind of laws and regulations there are and limitations. So that's important. And then talking about the global inequities of wealth and income. I mean, it's stunning, right? I mean, how the top 1% owns so much wealth that, it's like the rest of the 99% combined. And so, I mean, just those inequalities and the kind of pyramid shape of economic system that way is something we need to understand. United States have always based on that. I mean, maybe people don't want to talk about it that way, but the reality is that the wealth of United States is based on cheap labor, immigrants from other countries, and also very, very robust access to natural resources. I mean, United States is still the largest producer of oil in the world, although a lot of times people don't talk about it because, US buys its oil from Middle East, but, United States has its own oil reserves and manufacturing capabilities that are, larger than that. United States used to be the agricultural power in the world, and now Americans buy agricultural products from China and everywhere else because it's cheaper. And so railroads were built by Chinese immigrants. High rises in Chicago were built by Polish immigrants. So on and so on. So rich people like Rockefeller and other ones like that, they obviously built their fortunes by using really, really cheap labor and taking advantage of people's work. And then, of course, you have the shameful era of slavery that is the very, very darkest point of U.S. history, where economical gain was created by slaving people, and so there's a dark history of some of these economies, and how they were built, and there's still some of it in the world out there. There's still a lot of bonded labor that is really modern version of slavery that is happening, and so we are still in some ways operating in some parts of the world with that kind of a same, taking advantage of people's labor, generate wealth, and then rich are rich and poor are poor, and rich countries take over the world kind of a thing. And so it's an interesting history of globalization. And sorry, I didn't mean to start with kind of like a dark note on that, but I mean, those are realities of the world. I mean, history has not been fair. You know, we have to look at it, you know, from that perspective. So globalization really is the increasing movements of goods, services, and capital across national borders. You are all part of that global marketplace globalization. So there really are two different ways to look at globalization, and one would be the globalization of products or goods and services, in which we expand their market, you know, widen the market opportunity by starting to sell products around the world and not just domestically. So we are finding more customers by importing, exporting, you know, and that's one type of globalization. And then other kind of globalization is really globalization of production, globalization of labor. You know, how we recognize that we may have in our own country expensive labor, we have to pay high wages, and that makes products expensive. And so we turn around and we go to other countries where wages are lower, and we set up our factories in those countries. Sometimes it's not just because of the wages, sometimes it's an access to raw materials. I mean, if you need lumber, it makes sense to have your factory next to forest. You know, I mean, you know, you go where the raw materials are. Sometimes it's because of knowledge. If you need a lot of engineers, you know, you may want to set up your R&D facilities in Japan or Scandinavia, where there are a lot of, you know, engineers. So it's, you know, finding that optimal type of labor becomes a way for the organization to kind of compete and succeed in the global marketplace. So so that's the globalization of production. So it's kind of two different ways of kind of looking at, you know, how globalization, and both of them have their own nuances. Certainly economic unions like European Union was formed to make it easier to exchange labor between countries. So so yeah, the international trade, of course, you know, financial flows integrate the world economy. It's not really useful to talk about German economy or American economy, United States economy anymore in an isolated fashion, because all economies are connected to everybody else's economies. So I mean, you look at products in a road. I mean, I always, you know, use car analogies. I mean, you know, there's so many BMWs and Mercedes, you know, in the roads of United States, that obviously there was a time where you want to see any imports, and now imports are dominant, Toyotas and whatever. So you can see how everyday products, you look around in your kitchen, and I mean, I don't know about you, but if I look at, you know, I see Samsung, I see Panasonic, I see, you know, General Electric. So I see different kinds of brands around my household, and they come from all over the world. So that's just how, you know, our, you know, economy is. And then you start thinking of how that, you know, spreads. Certain technology gets transferred to different countries through these companies, and so technology is spread. You know, culture gets impacted by that. I remember when I took my wife first time to Finland, and she looked around in downtown Finland and sort of like, well, this is kind of interesting, because I see a lot of the same companies that I see in United States. It kind of feels like not really that different. I guess she sort of expected Helsinki to be a lot different than American cities, and in some ways it isn't. Same products, same stores, McDonald's, Burger King, you know, Starbucks. I lived in South Korea in Itaewon, and in the street where I lived, there was Nike store, there was Starbucks, there was McDonald's and Burger King, and other ones. and it was just very, very international. Well, mostly American, but there were some some European companies as well. So globalization is really just not simply a trend or fad. It's not something that when people say, they like or don't like, okay, well, you can have opinions about globalization, but it's an international system, and it's here to stay. We can't turn around and not have globalization at this point anymore, because we are so interdependent for resources as countries, that it's just the way things work. So there are, of course, many different ways of entering and competing in a global marketplace. Of course, the first level of international expansion is import export, just as selling your products to other country or buying your products from another country, and then that can develop all the way into direct investments where you actually purchase land and build buildings and factories in other countries land and other countries territory, and you become integrated as part of the economy in that way. So there's everything in between there. And we get a sip of coffee here. So so it starts from first building a successful business in your home country, and then when it really starts doing well in your home country and you're like, okay, we are so good, we could probably expand this somewhere else, then you start expanding like Nestle or PayPal. Sometimes you have some funny things that happen in that process. You probably learned, studied, or maybe heard about Euro Disney. Excuse me. So Euro Disney, when they built Disneyland Park in Paris, they really were applying some American ways of thinking. So they wanted to maintain their worldwide, at that time, worldwide rule of no alcohol in Disney's theme parks. Well, building dining establishments, dinner restaurants in a theme park in Paris and not serving wine is probably not a good idea. And I think any European would have been able to tell them that, but they just thought that, well, we are Disney, we can do it differently. Didn't work. They also sort of somehow understood that Europeans don't eat proper breakfast, that Europeans only eat continental breakfast. Because here in the United States, if you call continental breakfast, and that in people's mind is how Europeans eat breakfast, you basically have a pastry and coffee and orange juice. And also when Americans go to a theme park like Disney World in Orlando, they stay for a week. They stay in a resort, in a hotel, and they go to multiple parks and they make a whole vacation out of it. Europeans have this strange thing called mass transportation, aka trains, which a lot of American cities don't. So Europeans are much more likely to hop in a train in the morning, go to the theme park, hang out there for the day, and go home for the evening. So those hotels that Disney built were not really successful, especially because there were no real breakfast facilities in them. So those were just examples of sort of ethnocentrism, where Americans failed to understand, Disney Corporation failed to understand cultural nuances, or over stereotype certain cultural nuances. Coca-Cola, when they first expanded to China, the Chinese character, for Coca-Cola was something inappropriate. It read as something highly inappropriate, and they didn't first recognize that, and so they got obviously a lot of criticism about selling a product that said something inappropriate. So they had to change the character. My understanding is that Chinese character for Coca-Cola actually means fizzy water, because they just had to find something that would be understandable. In Latin America, Chevrolet sold a car, called Nova, and there is Chevy Nova in US. It's fairly popular. There's collectors, buying them right now, and the old Chevy Novas are, pretty valuable. Well, Nova in Spanish means don't go. Well, I don't think it's a good car name. Chevy don't go, doesn't go. Well, you want car to go. So those are just silly examples of numerous things that these companies have done wrong, importing, exporting, and found the hard way that, what works in one country may not work in another country. And so it's really kind of interesting and fascinating. And that's why we read these cases, because these cases, they talk about those kinds of things, how things worked and how they didn't work, and, the blunders that companies, did. And so, like I said earlier, after exporting, importing, if things really go well, you start going to joint ventures, partnerships, and then eventually you locate manufacturing plants and service operations in other countries as a way of cutting costs. So, that's BMW is famous for that. BMW, they don't ship their SUVs to the United States from Germany. They built them in Alabama. And so Mercedes does too, and Toyota, Honda, they have factories here in US, and obviously, other where too. So then companies, they kind of create these pretty complicated and complex global supply chains. They purchase those raw materials, components, and other suppliers from sellers in other countries and subcontract. And so Nike got in in trouble, but they got a lot of negative publicity some decades ago now, for using these cheap laborers, sweatshops and child labor in other countries. And it was somewhat unfair, because the reality is that everybody does it. So many of our fabrics, clothing that we wear, are built in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is really a center for all of that. And a lot of people didn't know about even, that a lot of those products were built in Bangladesh before they had that collapse of, factory there. A lot of local Bangladeshi people got killed in working in a building that was really, falling apart, and eventually did fall apart. And it became known that a lot of these companies, famous companies, Louis Vuitton, whatever, from all over the world, were using that facility, for manufacturing their goods. There's a lot of stories. Cobalt that is being mined, for lithium batteries, comes from mines in Africa where child labor is used. Just goes on and on and on. There is some good stories about that. Coffee story, for example. If some of you may know, but in Latin America, Southern American countries, well, coffee is produced in places like Brazil, Venezuela, etc. Colombia, obviously. There is kind of a system, out there of middlemen, kind of a warehousing, of these companies who collect these coffee beans from local farmers, and these companies, they then sell, the coffee in bulk to these international coffee companies, and they kind of refer to it as coffee cartel, because they pay very cheap prices to these local farmers for the coffee beans, and they therefore contribute to almost slave-like conditions, poverty, and everything. And because the farmers get so little in return for their efforts growing coffee beans, the quality of coffee beans is also not good. So Starbucks, they recognize that, and they said, well, for us to have good quality coffee in our coffee shops, we got to do something differently. So they went directly to those villages, and they said, here's some money for you to invest in your farming so that you can utilize some modern farming techniques and improve the quality of your soil, improve the quality of your coffee bean, and then I give you this money in exchange of exclusive contract that you will sell your coffee beans not to the cartels, not to the coffee cartels, but to sell directly to us, and we pay you fair trade value and price for the coffee. And so when you go to Starbucks and you buy coffee, well, coffee is $4 or something, and obviously it's double or even more. I mean, you can buy a coffee for $1 at McDonald's and pay $4 for it, in Starbucks, and coffee is coffee, I guess, to some people. But if quality matters, or if ethics of it matter, where the coffee comes from, then people should go to Starbucks. And they use that as a marketing tool. They tell people, how they do it. So, they are good examples. Body Shop uses raw materials from around the world that they, buy organic products, pay, fair trade prices. Ben and Jerry's ice cream, they use local farmers. So they are responsible companies out there doing a good job. And then there are a lot of irresponsible companies that are selling, making, and sourcing materials in a rather questionable way. So there are a lot of ethical, like child labor. One hand, you can say, if child labor is, illegal in the United States, how does it make it okay for you as an American company to go to, I don't know, Bangladesh, India, Philippines, and use child labor there just because it's legal there? That would be one criticism. On the other hand, somebody would say, well, how is it unethical for you to do that when in that country all companies do that? And because of the ability of that child. Yeah, go ahead. Somebody was saying something. Okay, no, let me know if you have an opinion. Somebody would say that in those countries, everybody uses child labor. And if Nike, in they quote unquote sweatshops, provide air conditioning and pay a little bit better than the other sweatshops, then really they are doing more ethically and better. And if they would pay so significantly better than everybody else, they would ruin the local economy, because now everybody would want to work for Nike and nobody would work for the local companies, and they would start demanding higher prices in local companies, and those local companies would go out of business. So the consequences of trying to forcefully change the other country's system could also be negative, or having negative consequences. So it's not really that straightforward and easy. It's easy to have an opinion, but you got to think about a little bit the consequences. So there are a lot of enterprises out there that are all over the world. And talking about by non-financial, they mean not banks. You look at Toyota, you look at well, there is a bank, SoftBank Corporation in Japan. There is Daimler AG, there's Volkswagen Group, British American Tobacco, British Petroleum, Total, Anheuser-Busch. I guess people drink a lot of beer in the world. Royal Dutch Shell, Chevron. Those are just examples of companies and they worth. I mean, 308 billion, 253 billion, 243 billion, 250 billion. I mean, these are some big companies with enormous wealth, where a lot of times those companies are worth more than some small countries, entire gross national income. So it's stunning. So you start thinking, with company of 300 billion of value, offices anywhere in the world, what kind of power do they have? Can they go to politicians and twist their arm, so to speak, and say, let's do it this way or that way? Can they manipulate, systems globally? Absolutely, right? I mean, it would be naive of us not to realize that the real power in the world, in some ways, rests in the hands of some of these multinational companies, and how the leadership, the CEOs of those multinational companies wine and dine with their state leaders, country leaders, and are definitely having the influences and hands in many different things. So it's important to understand where the real power comes from in the world. So of course, another important aspect of globalization is the worldwide flow of capital. If you don't have FDI, which is foreign direct investment, a lot of this couldn't happen. And traditionally, historically, it was American investments in other parts of the world. Now, increasingly, it has been shifting little by little to a lot of different countries. First, European countries starting to make investments, then smaller and smaller countries around the world starting to make foreign investments to other countries. So now the American share of that is significantly smaller, probably just that 25% or something, when it used to be almost 100% at one point. So the power of economies have certainly shifted away from United States to many other countries in the world, and sometimes American businessmen and women maybe don't realize that, or remember that it's not an American economy anymore globally. I mean, it's still a lot of other players out there. China, obviously, I mean, they are powerful. Japan was in a track of becoming the biggest economy in the world, but then in the 90s they had the stock market crash, and they are kind of it's still kind of recovering from that. But I mean, FDI is significant. 2019 there was $1.54 trillion in foreign direct investments. That's a lot of money flowing to other countries and help putting up factories and etc. So obviously that kind of money has a huge impact on the economies of the countries that the investments are being made, and it changes those countries in many different ways. So of course, part of globalization includes human migration. Like I said earlier, United States is a country of immigration. I'm proud to be a first generation immigrant. I was born and raised in Finland. I moved to United States when I was 20 roughly, and became a US citizen, and now my life is here. And so I am one of those immigrants who came historically, and I mean, wasn't me building United States, but I mean, my people like me hundreds of years ago came and formed this country, and so this is really a country of immigrants, and lots of other parts of the world. I mean, you look at the immigration flows. Historically, there's been all kinds of flows to different direction, and the history of that is really important to understand. Some of the national boundaries, have been in some parts of the world, like in the Middle East, somewhat artificially built boundaries as a result of British Empire and other factors historically, without really considering the tribal and religious and other boundaries that exist. And same thing in Africa, and those consequently have created problems that are still being dealt with. So the history of all of this sort of migration and national borders and all of that is also really, really important and interesting. 2019, 3.5% of the world's population were living in countries other than they were born. So if you are one of those like myself, we are not alone. There are a lot of us out there. And so migration is definitely strong still and happening. And of course, during COVID-19 pandemic, it stopped a little bit, and some political factors. I don't want to get into politics, but we did have a president over here in the United States that tried to stop a lot of the immigration flows really was harmful, for a lot of us educators, because universities could not get student visas for their students. So, a lot of universities were struggling because a lot of the students were foreign students, and they could not come to the country anymore because of new regulations. So, yeah, that's sometimes tricky. So there are a lot of these, international institutions that in themselves we could talk like really, and we will, to go visit them just a little bit here. But the three institutions that are really the ones that set the rules is really World Bank. We all have heard of World Bank, International Monetary Fund, IMF, and then World Trade Organization, WTO. And so really no business can operate across national boundaries without complying with the rules that are set by World Trade Organization. And so many companies, they would not be able to start businesses, or many businesses are depending on World Bank and International Monetary Fund, to be able to survive. So just really quickly, World Bank was established in 1944, sort of provides those economic development loans to its member nations. It's, funds to be used for roads, dams, power plants, so infrastructure, because without infrastructure, proper business does not exist. In a matter of fact, two of the factors that are important in establishing whether you can do business in other countries: does the infrastructure exist, and is the political environment and banking environment, economy stable and secure enough for you to be able to operate there. Those World Bank funds, those member countries. International Monetary Fund is affiliated with World Bank, was created in the same time. It's really it's a fund that helps to stabilize the currency exchange rates and international payments. So if somebody's it's sort of fund that all the member countries have put some money in a bank for this fund. And if countries having great inflation or its economy is about to collapse, the International Monetary Fund can be used to bail out that country on behalf of the other member countries, in order to maintain the global, economy and system for all. So, it's obviously, and they do the bailing out through these loans that are then often forgiven later on. So it's really richer countries bailing out poorer countries. That's basically, but it's mandatory to do it that way because otherwise the system wouldn't work. Obviously, International Monetary Fund can then say, we give you this loan, but there are these conditions. We demand that government cut spending. You have to devalue your currency. You have to increase export. You have to liberalize financial markets, reduce wages, all of these kind of things, and many, many more. They can say, you got to basically create a free market capitalist system, in order to, for us to bail you out and have you as part of the system. Then there are many other World Trade Organizations. World Trade Organization is the historical, but there are many of these organizations around the world that help to facilitate world trade. But the World Trade Organization, the original one, was founded in 1995, which is relatively new. But it just was a successor for GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, that was meant. Was it Geneva or where it was formed originally? There's a history on that I don't remember right at the top of my head. But really, what was international body that was, just established, that establishes the ground rules for trade among nations and kind of policies it. They conduct rounds of negotiation of various topics to mediate between countries and sort of promote free trade and try to eliminate, barriers for trade, tariffs are a big part of it because, you know, if there's added taxes on imports, that becomes a problem. And, you know, we can talk about those a little bit more. And so, yeah. So that's kind of how it works. So before we start talking about benefits and cost of globalization, let's take a 15 minutes coffee break. My coffee is getting cold over here. So do you have any questions before we take a break? I kind of talked nonstop here, and so I want to give you an opportunity to talk in the next hour here. Any questions?
No, please.
Is anybody awake still?
Yes.
Oh, good. One person is awake.
We are awake.
Fabulous.
Don't worry.
You guys are good sports. Thank you. So, all right, go have a cup of coffee, and let's be back in roughly 10 after. So that's actually 17 minutes. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome back. Everybody who's not here, place your arms. Thank you, Rafat. Any questions? Did you come up with any questions during your break? Are you energized?
Yes.
Do you know that Alaska is the most coffee drinking state in the United States? For obvious reasons. You know, during winter time, it's so dark and cold here that people need something to wake up. But and cold, obviously. And right now, it's, by the way, the longest day in a year today here. It's we have 20 hours of sunlight and 2 hours of twilight, you know, where it's still light, but, you know, technically it's not sunlight, but it's almost like afternoon. So really, it's daylight here entire day. Has anybody ever experienced that?
Actually, no, but I think Finland is the same.
Yes. Finland is very much the same. That's why I am used to it from my childhood. My wife has visited Finland with me. My kids, they have never experienced this, and you know, so it's just interesting for them. So today is summer solstice. In Finland, we call it Juhannus. You know, and it's a celebration of the midsummer. And so, yeah, it's beautiful right now, and it's been absolutely beautiful for the last week over here. I mean, this is. I posted Facebook that, you know, question that does paradise have to be tropical? Because, you know, the summer is just so beautiful here in Alaska. It's just magnificent. So if any one of you ever have an opportunity to visit Alaska, I highly recommend it. Summertime, it's just, it's beautiful. So yeah, today is our celebration. Which interestingly, one of the reasons that I moved to Anchorage has to do with globalization. Anchorage is very, very diverse. The school system here is the most diverse school system in the entire United States. There are people here from all over the world. It's stunning, you know, and part of that is because of the globalization. They you know, obviously have a lot of oil operations here. There are a lot of fisheries. There are a lot of different operations that bring people to work over here from all over the world. And of course, historically, Alaska, when Alaska became a state, there was gold rush, and they, you know, people came here to look for gold, and so and of course tourism. There are people who come here, tourists, you know, large numbers every single year. So this is a very, very international place. And a lot of people perhaps don't realize that, which is why I like it here, because I consider myself a global citizen, global nomad. really don't have a home anymore. Finland is where I'm from. Alaska is where I live. But there in between, I've been in so many different places. And most of my life, I had dealt with international type of people, so, this isn't about me. I'm just simply pointing out that some pockets in the world are very influenced by globalization. And Alaska certainly is one of those. And
So
so,
you are live example of globalization, Dr. Tom.
yes, I consider myself an example of globalization. I if you don't mind me kind of just sharing a little bit of a story, I have a relative, a cousin of my mother, um, who was executive in Kone elevator company. If you ever heard of Kone, it's a Finnish company. A lot of elevators and escalators in the world are built by Kone. And he also worked for Outokumpu, which is steel manufacturer and company from Finland. And so he was sent as an expatriate to, I think first he went to Sweden, then Germany, and then Brazil. And all throughout my childhood, I heard stories about him, working in these companies, Finnish companies in global places. And I sort of always admired that. And I really liked him as a relative. So he influenced me in a way that, automatically in my mind, my goal when I finished high school was to leave Finland and go explore the world. And so I just happened to go to San Diego, California, and went other places from there, Honolulu, Hawaii, and all of that sort of stuff. So um, yeah, I mean, we I think that's how we get intrigued by somebody we know, somebody we see out there, who is working in different countries, and we get fascinated by that, and we go chase our own dream. And that's what happened to me. I mean, I didn't know that I was going to become, an immigrant over here. And but yeah, I'm sure you all have similar stories. And I kind of I was fascinated by this globalization. And I remember before European Union, when I was a teenager, I must have been 16, 17 years old. I spent the summer in Riviera, Spanish Riviera, Costa del Sol in Spain. And our my relatives had kind of a villa there, and they went to safari in Africa, and they needed somebody to look after their house. And so I went there and I spent the summer there. And we would be sitting in this cafe or bar, drinking some beer. Don't tell anybody that I was that young drinking beer in Spain. But we were talking about how wonderful it would be if Europe would be united, and if Europe would be, if we would be able to travel to each other's countries and work in there. And because back then, it was impossible. This was probably 1986, 1987, somewhere about there. And so, yeah, we were fantasizing about it. And so you can imagine how, for me, growing up with a bunch of international people like that, and sitting there talking with them, dreaming about united Europe, and then when it then happened, it's just kind of magnificent, to see how the world is changing. So yeah, there's clearly some benefits. I mean, that kind of a shared cultural knowledge, that kind of opportunity for us to get educated in different parts of the world, and many other kinds of things. There are benefits, but there are also disadvantages. There are also costs to globalization, and so globalization is controversial in that sense. Now, obviously, I'm a, in a, I supporter of globalization, so I'm more on the side of benefits. But I mean, it's important to recognize their cost as well. So, for example, obviously, benefit of globalization is that it increases economic productivity. We find people work for us in around different parts of the world, and people get jobs, we get more productive, we are able to produce goods and services for lower prices, which then benefits the customers. I mean, if you think about it, a iPhone. I mean, I would not be holding iPhone in my hand right now if it would not be, manufactured in China. Because if they would manufacture iPhones here in the United States, it would cost us roughly 3 times more. And I think that $1,000 for an iPhone is a lot already. I don't think that I would be able to buy a $3,000 iPhone and justify it. So it clearly benefits me. I'm wearing a shirt that probably was made in China or made in Bangladesh, and it would cost me money many times more if it would be tailor made, by somebody without mass production somewhere in the cheaper part of the world. So we all benefit from it. Every single one of you wear clothing that is probably, built somewhere else, and use products, built somewhere else. But of course, it does cause job insecurity, because now those countries, that many jobs, agricultural workers, they have to be now in the United States subsidized by the government, because they can survive, because we are buying fruits and, fruits from Brazil when we could produce them in Florida, or wheat from China when we could produce that in Midwest. And so that, of course, becomes, people lose jobs in many different industries because of that. One could say that, and we could go on and on about the different economics theories and absolute advantage and comparative advantage, and these different models, that because of specialization, and when countries become specialized in certain things, then their job insecurity situation is not that big of an issue, because people just get retrained and go and work in different industry. But maybe some people don't want to do that. Hotels, for example, hospitality industry. United States is a global leader in hospitality industry. All of the largest hotel chains in the world, are owned by Americans, and so there are a lot of service jobs. There are a lot of hospitality jobs. American, economy has turned from agricultural manufacturing country into a service, economy. So now, and high tech. Of course, high tech is, one of the US big. And who knows what it's going to be in the future? And every country is the same way. The economies change. They focus on certain things that is globally important. Reduces prices to consumers, like I said earlier, that's great, but it weakens environmental and labor standards, of course, because it's sort of companies go in search for these lower standards, and there is no incentive of increasing the standards. So poor will remain poor, and sweatshops will continue to exist because companies want them to exist. And so, of course, that's cost of globalization. But then again, there's an argument that the transition of technology, countries that became destinations for, cheap labor, sweatshops, they also learn new things, and education gets spread out, in a way like India, for example. Now India is a superpower. There are lots of products from India. Tata Motors, I drive a Jaguar, and it's owned by Indian companies. So, India wasn't always there, and it's because of globalization. Obviously, China is a superpower right now, and they got there in big part of because of globalization. So you can kind of look at the big picture of that as well. So globalization gives developing countries sort of access to those, foreign investment funds, so that they can support the economic development. And that's very true. Without the money from World Bank and International Monetary Fund, and the direct investments by global companies into their countries, those countries would remain poor. They really wouldn't wouldn't have the means to compete in a global market. And now, because of globalization, they are able to do some big things. And so, but then of course, it prevents individual nations for being independent in the sense that they can't really promote their own environmental and social objectives, because if they are in conflict with their global needs and regulations, then they have to obey by those world regulations, and they can't really do differently themselves. So in some hand, obviously, if you start thinking about, if the country wants to save the environment, Brazil, if they want to save their rainforest, well, the country government may want to do that, but there are global powers of needs for lumber and companies who will continue pushing indefinitely to to pursue more lumber. So I mean, they are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Transfers technology, like I said earlier, yes, absolutely, there's transfer technology, but it does erode regional and national cultures and undermines cultural, linguistic, and religious diversity. Finland, like where I'm from, is considered by some people to be in one of the perhaps the most Americanized country in Europe. My wife noticed that there's a very much of an American influence in Helsinki. Everybody speaks English, obviously with similar sounding accent than I have, but it's mandatory to speak English from graduating from high school. So anybody who went to high school speaks English in Finland. So, but I don't know if I would go as far as it has eroded Finnish identity. I mean, I think that cultures are stronger than that. Influences, come there. Look at Japan. I mean, Japan is heavily influenced by globalization and American influence. There's American servicemen out there and have been there present all the time since World War II. Same thing in Korea. And I lived in Korea and been in Japan many times. And I want to say that their own cultural identity would be, I mean, influenced, yes, but to be, undermined or ruined somehow or eroded, I wouldn't probably go that far. But I mean, people have different opinions about that. I think that people can adopt quote unquote Western influences and still maintain their own cultural values. I think that, you look at, a lot of Arab countries, Bahrain, is a good example perhaps, or, UAE, you go to Dubai and so forth. And I think that there's an interesting sort of blend of sort of perhaps the global influences and not just Western influences, because it's not just about Western, but also Middle Eastern traditions and cultures. And, you guys know more about than I do, but, what are your thoughts? Do you think that your home countries have been eroded culturally because of the globalization? I mean, it's completely okay to feel like they have. I don't know. I mean, people have different opinions. So what do you all think?
We have the same as you said. Yeah, we are influenced by the globalization, by the Western culture. But at the end of the day, if the culture and history of the country is big enough, I think it will be enrich the culture of this country. In Egypt, we have many people speaking English, French, but English is more wide, wearing the same as Europe or America. But we still have our own traditions. We still have our own values. But in my opinion, globalization make the people all over the world being dependent, not independent. Maybe 50, 60 years before in Egypt, you will find the countryside producing their food, baking their breads, doing their stuff. But now everything is cheaper in comparison with the effort. So now there is no, maybe few taking care of cattle, making their breads, very few. And it's become heritage.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And anybody else, do you share the same perspective? Oh, by the way, do you hear a fan behind me? Because it's very hot inside in our house because there's no air conditioning in Alaska, and it's this time of year it's hot, so I have a fan rotating behind me. So if I was wondering if anybody can hear it, but
No,
sounds like you can
I
hear
don't
me.
hear
Okay.
it.
Okay, that's good. So yeah, anybody else? Does anybody else have similar thoughts or different thoughts? It's okay to, feel differently. But I'm just very curious because I mean you live in a part of the world that I'm not, in that part of the world, and although I've met hundreds of people from your part of the world, I haven't visited there as often as maybe, in Asia or Europe. So I'm just curious how globalization have influenced your, you know, countries where you're from.
Yeah, as Mr. Rafat said, the globalization has affected all the world, and in our side of the world, yes, and especially the American culture. But this you will find it more spread in the major cities, while in the countryside they still have their own
Yeah,
culture.
yeah,
They
yeah.
still have the go to the route, you will see everything related to their culture. But if you go to the major cities, no, it is
Yeah,
you can see it's globalized, especially the American culture. Recently, the Asian culture start to come to the Middle East. You will find Indian, Filipinos from many countries. So with the globalization, especially in UAE and Saudi, you will see the effect of the Asian, of the American, of the European, of all the countries.
right. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Ibrahim. I agree. I mean, it's in Korea. I mean, Seoul is very international. Then I traveled down south to some of the smaller villages. Nobody spoke English. They very rarely see outsiders. So it was completely different. Muha- uh, Anybody else? Anybody else? Mohammed, did you want to say something?
Yes. Yani I could say also that the globalization, it has, yes, it might have very good benefits, I would say, on countries which will be prepared to receive international goods, and it has I would say a population that will get for sure benefits of receiving goods from China or from wherever. For sure, this will be good. But on the other side, if I'm not ready as a country for this invasion, I would say, from China, so my economy or the countries, the local countries, will cannot compete with the products coming from outside. So this can affect directly the companies or the local companies. So yani it is a good way from one point, but if I'm not ready, it could affect my local economy on the other side.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Good. 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 Makes sense. Yeah, it's really cool to see it kind of in a pretty balanced way. And
Yeah,
you know,
I have a
I
comment, Doctor.
go ahead, go ahead.
Before the globalization and the World Trade Organization start to be an effect, most of the countries they will have taxes on the imported goods from international markets to protect their own production and their agricultural products. But
Hmm.
after the globalization, it, it was condition of the globalization to cancel these taxes. So there's no protection for the local industries and agricultural product. So this
Right.
is affect, uh, as Mr. Muhammad said, this affect the local industry, the agricultural products, and in some countries, yeah, it's vanished, start to vanish from the local market. All the product
Sure.
you will find it imported, and this is
Yes.
really in somehow has a negative impact on the economy of these countries.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I hear you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And there's a reason why I asked this question right at this point of the presentation, is because the second step of that is the final line in a slide there, which is, spreading democracy and freedom and reducing military conflict. One could also say that, in some way globalization has, I saw the happy, the laughing face there.
It is not
Uh,
happy. It is laughing.
Right. Yeah. No, sorry. Yeah. Not
Sarcastic.
happy, laughing, yes. Yes, absolutely. No, not happy at all. Sorry. Yeah. I mean, it's laughable. I get you what you're saying, Rafa. I mean, that's controversial. I think the most controversial issue is idea of spreading democracy, and I mean, especially with you folks from Middle East. I mean, I understand the history of Middle East. I mean, how Western countries have been messing around there, from I mean, long time in history, and made terrible mistakes and horrible things, and that continues. And a lot of oil companies, a lot of big business is of course behind a lot of those moves. It's not just politicians, but it's big money influences and like that. So yeah, I mean, and that's obviously, I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of opinions about that. Then certainly, if you want to share, go ahead. I would like to hear that, because I mean, I come from Finland, where democracy has always been that way during my lifetime. And but interestingly, here in United States, when I talk about the Scandinavian way, people see me almost as a socialist. I mean, not so far as a communist, but definitely the Scandinavian socialism, social democratic system is being seen, not capitalist enough, which is not true at all. There are a lot of entrepreneurs and small businesses and a lot of capitalism in Finland, but yeah, the political system is similar enough to US and European countries that it doesn't maybe stick in conflict in the same way. But Middle East, obviously, I mean, that's not the same thing, right? So how do you think that the spreading of democracy is working in your part of the world?
Let me share with you, Dr. Tomi. The theory itself is okay if we apply it with the ideal thought or ideal thinking of it. If we have a true globalization, yes, it will spread democracy and freedom and could be making the world a better place. But again, 2-3 slides before, we talk about the big tycoon of multinational companies,
Yes.
which is controlling everything.
Yes.
And these big tycoons, I think that the biggest tycoon, the dinosaurs, is the military production companies, which is
Yes.
affecting everything.
Right.
2-3 days ago, I just heard in CNBC news that US is pushing Japan and Korea to ban China from exporting them microchips. So it's not a globalization, it's really
Right,
a
yeah.
war, but war in a different way. So they are trying to manipulate or to spread their thoughts with the way they will be beneficiary from it. They will
Right.
not care about the harm they will do for these countries. And democracy, we have many examples of people came to government by democratic ways, but it's not the people they are like, so they make troubles in these countries. And by the way, in Palestine, Hamas came from a democratic process, and they are
Yeah.
elected democratically, and they are refused by the Arab people, most of them, definitely
Yeah.
US. And again, it's the idea itself, it's honorable, and I think it's, if it is applied in the correct way, I think it could be make some countries and people better than now.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, democracy is not a bad word in itself. The ideals of democracy, I think, are good, but people countries and politicians and business leaders out there, they often use democracy in a twisted kind of a way for their own greedy, selfish needs. And I mean, ideally, democracy should, have fairness of elections. And I think that, we can agree that there are lots of countries in the world where, elections probably not fair. I mean, North Korea doesn't have fair elections. Russia, I would argue, doesn't have fair elections. So in a surface level, they talk about democracy and having elections, but in reality, it's not an fair election where everybody can freely vote whoever they want, or even candidate. I mean, not just anybody can become a candidate. And I can say that in US as well. I mean, who gets to that up? Like, we are approaching presidential election over here, and I think it's going to be a terribly difficult year because, I mean, country is going to be divided in a way that I don't think we've seen ever before. And, I just can understand that in a country of 300 something million people, we can't find two better candidates than these two gentlemen. I'm using the word gentleman lightly here. And so, I mean, really, we can't find any better candidates. And that's what's weird about the fact that, I mean, it's not fair election because not just anybody can become, a candidate. And so it's a very, very, it's obviously influenced by money, and coalitions, power, all of kind of things that are not really about who is the best leader. Independent media, yeah, I mean, it's Fox News and CNN, BBC, all of these other news agencies, are they independent? No, they're corporations, and corporations are, governed, by individuals with certain political perspectives. And, anybody who thinks that they are news is probably fooling themselves. I mean, it's entertainment. It's, entertainment opinion shows flavored with the tone of news, so that people think that they are talking about some real things, but in reality, they choose very carefully what they show, what they talk about. Here in US, how little we know about what happens in Middle East or Ukraine in real world. I mean, because the little snippets in news that they show are very one-sided, very biased, and it just depends which TV station, which news station, you choose, and they give you, the flavor that they support. So there's no independent media, at least in US. I mean, maybe some European countries have a little more independent media, but I would argue that every media, almost everywhere in the world, is somewhat biased. Separation of powers. Democracy is supposed to have, separate them between executive, legislative, judicial branches of government. Yeah, I mean, theoretically, here in the US, we have that. But again, theoretically, I mean, one could argue that it's really not as separated as we want it to be. But if you would be looking for a country where to invest your foreign direct investments, you would be looking at these kind of factors. You would looking at these, you would want it to have a separation of powers. You would want it to have fair elections. You would want it to have independent media as much as possible, an open society where citizens have right to form their own independent organizations, be entrepreneurs, start small businesses, that sort of a thing. And of course, I mean, in some countries, they have a little bit less ability to do that than others. And then there are some countries that they have no ability to do that at all. And so how would we be able to start, do as a foreign company? How would you start business in a country like that, where, you can have, the only vendor, only supplier, only customer you're going to have in that way is the government? It wouldn't make any sense. You wouldn't have clientele. So, obviously, from the perspective of globalization, you are looking for these factors. And theoretically, in a utopia, in an ideal world, democracy does exist. But in a real world, we can argue that pure democracy doesn't exist any more than pure communism. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that communism came from Karl Marx, who was a British economist. And he himself noted in his writings that it was a utopian idea, that in real world, it would not work. And the reason why it wouldn't work is it goes against human nature. But then Lenin, of course, turned around and thought that it was a good idea and opportunistically, used that as a beginning of his revolution. And Stalin took it to the next level and, killed more of his own people than Hitler killed, people in general. So, I mean, communism was forced upon people as a dictatorship. And of course, that's the same way in North Korea and so forth and so on. Doesn't necessarily mean that the word communism is a bad word. It just means that it has been implemented by dictators and military leaders in a way that it has suppressed, people. So, and the capitalism, pure form of capitalism, doesn't exist anywhere. All countries, including United States, is a mixed economy. There is certain government-controlled entities and certain, individually owned entities. And the fact that United States has a large military is a perfect example of that. Military is not a free enterprise. It's not an independently owned. It's government-owned, monopoly. And so obviously that's technically a feature of communism, that state controls those kinds of things. Well, so, obviously US is a mixed economy in that sense. It's just a little bit less mixed than Finland, for example, that has a little bit more that, free healthcare or taxpayer-paid healthcare. Nothing is free. Taxpayer-paid education and certain things like that. So, there's just different variations of the same. So, yeah, I mean, comparatively speaking, democracy has declined, according to Freedom House estimates. 25% of the countries are quote unquote not free. However, they determine freeness, and 32% are only partly free. And I just want to comment here that freedom is also a perception. And, there are countries and places where people are, maybe not happy, but satisfied and safe and live normal lives where they are not technically free. And then there are countries where people are free, but there's also a lot of crime. There's also a lot of difficulties, and they are not safe and not living good lives. So just because people perceive themselves to be free doesn't mean that that equals good and safe and great. So these are complicated issues, and a lot of people have very strong opinions about these things. I don't. I'm not a patriotic person simply because I'm not really, many people say I'm not a real American. Well, I have a, US citizenship, but I also have Finnish citizenship, and through that, a European Union citizenship. So don't really consider myself, particularly, diehard American in that kind of way. So I think that, it's important for people to see the pros and cons, of their own countries, and, make, choices, with eyes wide open, what they are being part of. Certainly, one way to look at sort of comparative political systems have to do with sort of human rights. Obviously, they, vary greatly between nations, and these are controversial topics because in some countries, certain aspects of human rights as seem, as aspect of their society. I mean, like women's rights. There are certain countries where, we may in Scandinavia, when women are very equal and very free in that sense, may look at to those countries and say, well, that's just not right. That in those countries, women are, forced by the society to be in a certain role and certain, and then in those societies, they consider that to be completely normal. So just because one group of people sees something as being wrong doesn't mean that it's categorically wrong. It's just that, cultural differences. And so I think that it's very important to not make any quick judgments about these things. But, of course, judgments are being made all the time out there in a leadership level, and politicians, point a finger at countries with different, human rights. But I think we can all agree that dictatorial countries like, I don't know, Soviet Union, where KGB controlled the country, and, when, citizens were suppressed to the point that they were fearful of their lives, of saying something wrong, and North Korea, where, obviously, people have no freedoms at all, even China, where freedoms are limited. I think that most of us would agree that those kinds of human rights, is not something that we would consider to be democratic, and in most people would consider to be unacceptable. Um, you know, so there are some United Nations covenants, Universal Declaration of Human Rights that has been put in place, and saying there's these certain elements that we expect to be, universally accepted human rights. But still, there are many violations that occur. 5 million children die each year before their 5th birthday due to pneumonia, diarrhea, malaria, and other diseases. I mean, just because of lack of healthcare and lack of access to healthcare. And, in those countries, rich have access to healthcare and poor don't, because, the governments, not, protecting, providing, those healthcare, to people in need. I think, that everybody should probably, find that unacceptable. You know, systems where minority groups, on indigenous people lack basic human rights. Untouchables in Nepal, untouchables in India. I mean, certainly in India, you're not supposed to legally anymore have untouchables, but when you go to northern regions of India, there are large groups of millions of people who have no access to education because they are formerly known as untouchables. And, I mean, things haven't changed a lot in those traditional, you guys pointed out, earlier that in many countries, big cities may be very international and global, but then you go to small villages and those cultural values are still very much intact. And in many cases, that's good that the cultural values are protected and intact, but in a lot of ways, there's the darker side of that too. 25 million people worldwide are victims of forced labor, trafficking, and human slavery. Is much more slavery in the world today than there was during the time when there was slavery in the United States. That's not in any way, by the way, an excuse or justification for slavery at all. I'm just pointing out the fact that, slavery did not end, in a civil war in the United States. Slavery is very much out there, part of human existence, and has been probably since the beginning of humanity. Again, not acceptable in any form, or but it is very much existing there, and it's horrible. We just are not able to stop it. Genocide, mass murder of innocent civilians, Syria, Rwanda. I mean, there's many other examples, which is obviously controversial because some people perhaps don't see it as genocide. Some people, I don't know anybody sees it's a justified of killing of, large groups of people like that. But I mean, obviously for religious and political values perspective, people may have differences of opinion slightly of what took place. And I don't want to get into those things, but there's, without a doubt, there was lots of innocent people were killed in Syria, lots of innocent people were killed in Rwanda. And, I mean, it's just horrible, right? So any thoughts anybody have about those? Any issues, what are your thoughts about human rights?
when I talk about the human rights, the problem, most of the dominant countries, which is the richest and most powerful countries, they have they support the human rights in the way it serves their benefits. But
Right.
actually, when
Yes.
when there's a conflict of interest, no, they will close their eyes and they will never accept that fact that there is genocide, like for example, what's going now in Palestine,
Right.
because
Yeah.
it is against their interest.
Right.
Many
Yes.
cases. So
Yes.
if you want to apply or to implement the human rights, you have to be fair with all,
Yes.
not the side who serve your interest only. This is the
Right.
problem.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. I don't disagree with you at all. I mean, and United States has been, you know, terribly guilty of that. Terribly guilty of. Rafat, go ahead.
It's not only about genocide. Yani, if we are talking about the human rights, what we are seeing now and following in United States universities, when the youth trying to raise their voice with their thoughts, which is يعني, it's their right. I believe that as you are a US citizen, it's your right to say what you thought.
Right.
So we see in many prestigious universities how they are treating their own child, their own people, their own citizen, because they are contradicting with their political opinion. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, I know that the course is ideal for the ideal case or what we are hoping to have in this world. But really, يعني human rights are just a bunch of paper lying there in the UN and at the desk of the politicians. They are showing it when it's beneficiary for them, and it's hidden and it's not there when it's contradict with their policies, which they are to. Yeah, I'm really surprised what's happening in the US universities, because this is the example of the world for the democracy, for expressing yourself and your thoughts. And we saw them how they are treating the people, the youth, with a very aggressiveness to tell them go out of what you are doing. So
Yeah.
this is my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I don't disagree with that at all. I think shameful. Absolutely shameful. You know, to see how you know, in a country that talks about free speech, you know, students who are supposed to be learning to look at, you know, the world with open eyes and, you know, critically, you know, expressing they perspective in you know, peaceful protest. Now, obviously, sometimes people get a little out of hand in demonstrations, but protests that, you know, at least generally speaking, are intended to be peaceful, and then, you know, police go out there with, uh, obviously with SWAT gear on and with tanks and chase them out. Yeah, that's not freedom. Um, I mean, US have been, victim of, guilty of victimizing many countries. I mean, Japanese were put in concentration camps during World War II, and then, Americans turn around and criticize other countries of having concentration camps. I mean, it's just not right at all. And you're absolutely right. You look at, Afghanistan is a good example of, countries be going in and out, and US out there in and out, and really just in many ways, creating a lot of more problems for people. And yeah, and the Palestine situation right now, it's incomprehensible. I mean, it's the horrors that are happening there are just something else. And same thing in Ukraine. I mean, there's a lot of a lot of political talk about it and whatever, but I mean, the way world is running to help, I think it's I mean, you know it's good that they are doing something, but really, I mean, and when you think about, like, when Serbia and Croatia, where there was war out there, this was literally war in Europe's backyard, and nobody went to, do anything about it. And there were horrible human rights violations happening out there, and it's just there was no political and economic reason for people to go, countries to go out there and really, really help. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of talk, in UN and whatever, and then when it comes to actual action, they may be somewhat limited. And so, and I'm sure there are people in UN who mean good. I'm sure there are people in all of these organizations who have good intentions, but then you also have these large powers of corporations and political powers and corporations who lobby these politicians, and they are, wanting to maintain the situation the way it is so that they can, benefit themselves. So yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Rafat.
No, by mistake. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so a couple of more things really quickly. So obviously, we already talked about, comparative systems. I mentioned a little bit free enterprise system, central state control. I mean, obviously, those are sort of the two opposing things, and in reality, there's a little bit of a mixed of that in all countries. There is interesting if somebody wants to take a look at the index of economic freedom, look at the Heritage Foundation. They will, based on their criteria, they will rank countries in terms of what they perceive to be free. And again, like with any criteria, we can agree or disagree if that's the right criteria. But I wouldn't know if Hong Kong, the freedom in Hong Kong is somewhat limited recently. I know people from Singapore, and it's not really as free as people, would think that it is. There's a lot of Chinese influence and a lot of government influence in Singapore. New Zealand and Australia, okay, well, they are probably quite free in that sense. Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea, obviously, obviously are very repressed. The United States, although people in US want to be seeing themselves as the freest in the world, even Heritage Foundation's ranking was only 17th. And obviously, many can argue that, it would be lower than that. I mean, it just depends completely on people's perception. So inequality, wealth, income, those are the kinds of things where, those are the things that bug me the most. I mean, I was born and raised in a country that, there isn't, the gap between the poorest and the wealthiest isn't that large. In US is astronomical. Amount of wealth that is concentrated in the top 1% is just mind-blowing. You don't find those kind of billionaires in Finland. And again, I keep saying Finland like it's some sort of promised land. There are problems in Finland as well, but at least the system have a little bit more equality, and wealth is not concentrated in the top. And people, have a high standard of living, quality of living, because income, is generally pretty high for people. So, these are, again, a lot of things that can be argued, and there are people who argue these rankings and whatever, who's in the bottom, who's in the top of the pyramid. But there is sort of the global wealth out there of people who have 52 million people in the world who have their, less than 1%, that who just control their the top. I mean, those people, what influence they have is pretty significant. I mean, they're definitely they're only small amount of people in the top versus 2,768 million people, 54% that assets have less than 10,000, which is, I mean, even less than the poverty line in the United States. So you start looking at all of these lower, and you look at the top, and really, really, really top out there will be the really, really mega rich. And so that's sort of the sad thing about the world, is that wealth is concentrated in the top so much. But we are kind of in the end of our time. We are 2 minutes past, 11 here. And well, this is, we have few more slides over here. And just, I mean, I'm not gonna force you to read them, but this is a little bit more about the global inequality. The microfinance, where the microfinance loans are quite a bit given throughout the world by different institutions to try to help some of these countries and the small businesses. And then there are some collaborative partnerships for global solving, that we could go on and on and on about all of the different efforts globally of improving conditions. And some of those organizations work better than others, and they also all of these, I mean, three sectors that are business sector, government, and then the civil society around it. They have to kind of work together in all of these to kind of make positive changes. So I mean, it's a very complicated thing to be creating some global systems level change. And there's just a lot of organizations trying to do a lot of different things. And whether or not they are effective depends on individual cases, individual countries, and what they are seeking to kind of what the outcomes are. So any final thoughts and comments? I really appreciate all of your comments. Some of these are difficult and controversial topics, and I appreciate your calm perspective on these. It's horrible to talk about these things where horrible things are happening in your part of the world, and I'm not trying to defend United States in any stretch over here. It's just I live here, so I know about things over here. So, all right, thank you for your time again, and you know where to find me if you need anything from me. And I'll be posting some quick quiz questions for you next week. You'll have a week at least time to do it. So, don't worry. It's not, anything you have to memorize. I just want you to, find some answers. So, okay, sounds good.
Just to remind you, Dr. Tomi, can you please upload these slides for this lecture in the Moodle?
I will, absolutely. I will.
Thank-
I will do it right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.